Hello, everyone. Warmly welcome to today's seminar to be given by Mara Wade on the topic of From Digital Humanities to the Emblem Book as Album Amicorum. It's good to see so many of you here now after the spring break. Mara Wade is Professor Emerita of Germanic Languages and Literatures at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and is also the immediate past president of the Renaissance Society of America. She has been a guest professor at the Universität Göttingen and the Hochschule für Musik, Theater und Medien in Hanover. She has also been a visiting research scholar at the universities of Heidelberg, Erlangen, Nuremberg, and Stockholm University. And now we have the pleasure of having her here as a fellow in residence for this semester. Her research, which has achieved international recognition, focuses on emblems, digital humanities, court studies of Germany and Scandinavia, on gender studies and German literature and the arts in the early modern period. Her publications, and believe me, she is a very prolific writer, include books, articles, and chapters in several areas of Renaissance literature and culture and digital humanities as well. I'd like to mention the book Gender Matters, Discourses of Violence in Early Modern Literature and the Arts, published in 2014, but there are many others as well worthy of mention. Now, 2 edited volumes are currently at press for publication this year. Emblems in the Free Imperial City of Nuremberg, edited with Christopher Fletcher and Andrew Schwenk, and the book Collections and Books, Images and Texts, Early Modern German Cultures of the Book. She is an associate editor of the journal Emblematica, Essays in Word and Image, and having served until January of this year as editor-in-chief. Volume 5 of the journal Emblematica appeared under her editorship also earlier this year. With Pedro Germano Leal, she was the lead editor of Digital Emblematica, a special issue of Early Modern Digital Review in 2022. She is the PI for the project Emblematica Online, a web resource for emblem studies since 2002. And, not surprisingly, she has earned a number of research awards throughout her career, including being a Getty Scholar 2018 to 19 and a Newberry Library Fellow 2016 to 17. She also holds a Senior Research Prize from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And she was awarded the prize for excellent in undergraduate teaching from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Illinois. As a fellow here at SCAS, she works to complete the monograph, A Social History of the Renaissance Emblem. So it's my great pleasure now to welcome you here, Mara.
Thank you, Christina. We hope that I don't blast everybody out of the room. I want to thank SCAS and the board for inviting me here for this semester. It's a signal honor to be here, and I want to thank my cohort, every one of you, you know who you are, for making a congenial environment for research and recreation. We had a little of that recently. It's a friendly atmosphere for work. I also want to thank the community of early modern scholars here in Sweden, some of whom are here today. Thank you for taking the trouble to come all the way here. Several of them are online, and the greater community of Renaissance and emblem scholars who I think are tuning in from various places on the globe. I want to thank everyone for their long and generous support of my research. This presentation has 2 parts. I'm going to talk briefly about Emblematica Online to give you an idea of the kinds of digital ideas that have been swarming around in my head for a couple of decades, and how thinking about these things made me think about a new way to do a rather traditional scholarly monograph on the Renaissance emblem. And so as you know, it's from digital humanities to the emblem book as album Amicorum. So emblem research really started to blossom in the second half of the 20th century. There were national studies, so the German emblem, the French emblem, so on and so forth. There were author studies, Sambucus, Alciato, Bocchi. There were applied emblems, as in the cover of this book, which shows the emblematic ceiling in the town hall of Danzig, Gdańsk. And these applied emblems were both secular and in sacred spaces. There were a huge number of facsimiles, particularly prior to about the year 2000. They had a scholarly apparatus, marginalia, extended essays about the author and the artist, and bibliographies and so forth. And then there were freestanding bibliographies, such as the French emblem bibliography in 2 volumes that came out of Glasgow with Alison Adams, Stephen Rawls, and Alison Saunders, deserves particular attention. And there's a monumental handbook of emblems, Emblemata by Henkel and Schöne. And I mention that because Henkel and Schöne demonstrated the research potential of moving from a directly or a strictly volume-level bibliographic perspective to a more granular, emblem-level view of the emblem book corpus. Henkel and Schöne indexed 47 books partially, and partially indexed 3,700 approximately. And I mention these data because they will serve as a comparison to Emblematica Online in a moment. So we move then to digital projects, and with a huge amount of foresight, the Glasgow group convened a session around the year 2000, before most of us got funding to do projects. And that was great because we agreed on best standards and practices. And so when we went out, we were building corpora, we were building digital projects that in the future could talk to each other, could be interoperable. And Glasgow University in the end has 3 projects: French emblems, Alciato, and Italian emblems. There's the Emblem Project Utrecht, which focuses on the Dutch Golden Age. So if you ever need a Valentine and a heart emblem, come to us. And then there's Emblematica Online, which initially was a joint project funded by the NEH and DFG between Wolfenbüttel and Illinois to produce 2 small sets, much like in Utrecht and Glasgow, of German emblems and whatever else they would allow us to digitize. So the phase 1 was that, but then we got another round of important funding where we put those 2 small websites from Illinois and Wolfenbüttel together. It was my goal to make a portal, always, and it went so well, and because we use interoperable standards, we could integrate all of the metadata and the emblems from the 3 Glasgow projects in Utrecht. And for a Renaissance corpus, you're now starting to talk about big data. I realize if you're getting, downloads from the James Webb Telescope or something, this is not big data, but for us, it is big data. And since that time, and as part of it, we were also able to get the emblem books that the Getty Research Library and Duke University digitize with Google Books, and we have a very important emblem manuscript from the Newberry Library, Chicago. So, a continuous consultant and worker on this project, in addition to people at these various universities and my own, was Hans Brandhorst, who is the online editor of Iconclass, which is the classification system that we use for all of these projects. So we get from individual websites to a portal. And so Emblematica Online provides about 30 times what Henkel and Schöne did. We have a curated library of 1,407 digitized emblem books. They are freely accessible for research and pedagogy. You can browse and search across internationally held collections. You can do federated searches. You can always go back to the book that the emblem came from. And you can always go back to your initial search queries. The database has 33,233 individual emblems, a number I have inscribed in my forehead, I think. They are searchable according to mottos and elements from the Pictura that have been indexed with icon class. We often give people our data. Recently, we did a huge data dump to scholars in New Zealand who use it for teaching digital humanities. We have a GitHub, and on our GitHub you can find the icon class API, style sheets, templates, scripts, and so on. The research products of this 2 decades is phenomenal. Well, one, we have the resource itself, Emblematica Online. We have a couple of volumes of edited essays. We have the volume of edited reviews. There are probably, at least that I know about, 40 articles maybe. There's graduate student research, about a decade worth of graduate student funding from the German Department for the Library, also at other institutions. I'm not counting theirs, I'm counting the Illinois research results. And we also did a 3-year-long undergraduate research opportunity that was phenomenally successful. So, these are the kinds of things that I've been working on over the past decade. So how do you start DH research through Emblematica Online? So you build out from the digitization and the icon class metadata. I think of the Emblem portal as sort of an iTunes for emblem books. You pull, we no longer have albums, we have songs, or we did. I mean, even iTunes is sort of out of date now, but you get the idea. We have a jukebox, if you will, for emblems. And all of our emblems contain linked open metadata, so they can link to anything else that is indexed with those terms on the web. We engage very strongly in semantic web technologies. And this digital data starts revealing Renaissance networks of knowledge production and communication. And so one of the main emblem strategies is to work through analogies and parallels, redundancies, variations on a theme, and so forth. And so I was sort of percolating away, what can we do on the basis of this digital library, but maybe, 500,000 points of access through the metadata. So how do I get to what these emblems actually do? We have the artifact today, we have the books, and they are in books, but what did emblem do? They were a very popular genre for about 200 years. And I will conclude my talk with a case study about an emblem book as an album. So just quickly, what is an emblem? An emblem is generally considered to have 3 parts: a motto, and a pictura, and the epigram. They are most frequently today found in books, but I have a colleague who's doing fabulous research on painted emblems in small churches in southern Sweden, for example. And I'm taking Festina Lente as sort of my motto for today, and to show you that emblems are the ultimate recycling genre. And I'm going to walk you through several versions of this. So, and there are 2 key features to keep in mind about emblems. They're bimedial, usually, and they are concise. The concision of the emblem packing a lot of information into a compact form. So, these emblems all offer a variation on Festina Lente, make slowly, eile mit Weile, skynde långsamt. Yeah? So, all elements of an emblem can be recombined to create new emphases, new meanings, sometimes puns and jokes. And so here's a quick overview. The very famous anchor and dolphin of the Alding Press. Alciato's Maturandum, all in good time, another variation of Festina Lente. This is from the very first emblem book ever printed, That is supposed to be a slug on an arrow. All of these emblems would have their epigrams, but for reasons of space, I haven't included them. See, I only have 2 parts. The emblems, the emblematic prize medals of the University and Academy at Altdorf. Georg Reims and Peter Isselberg's Festina Lente from the Town Hall emblems in Nuremberg. A crab and a butterfly. Fast-growing ivy climbing up a column. Another version of an anchor and dolphin. Yet another. Turtle with a sail. The tortoise and the hare. A bolting horse being held by its tail. And this is from the Salon from Florence there. A colleague gave me that, a turtle with a sail. Tattoos. And this is my favorite, Melchior Lorck, a Danish artist who shows a turtle flying above the laguna. And there is no text because that turtle's already flying. It's in the air. So, let's keep calm and festina lente. I'm showing you a quick clip of the portal. You can search on emblems. There are drop-down menus of all kinds. You can search for emblems. You can search for books. You can search on keywords, date, publisher, the usual sorts of things. And so here I've put in Festina Lente. And you get 30 hits out of various libraries worldwide. And you see up above the date, you have the places, the collections they come from, the languages that they're in. This is just a really compact overview. You can do a lot more in the portal. This is just a taste. And so the social history of the emblem, how did I get there? In digital terms, open source code models generate a collaborative community based on modification, extension, and wide distribution of a source code along diverse paths of communication. These aspects of open sources also describe the dynamics of the early modern emblem, a combination of texts and pictures that were continuously modified, repurposed, and reassembled to produce new meanings for new audiences across Europe and beyond. So, it gets me to the social history of the emblem, and I've identified 4 areas that I think I can show various aspects of social aspects of the emblem. So, one is to cultivate elegant manners, as well as bonds of friendship and marriage in social settings. And, I'll back up. Just to have you look at that picture, this is a pun on a family name, Löffelholz. There's a bunch of spoons, Löffel in a heart. And in the background, there's the couple sitting on the edge of the bed, behaving very decorously for right now. And then the second one is establish corporate identity in learned societies. This is Stein Bjelke's patent of admission to the Fruchtbringende Gesellschaft in Weimar in 1656. It was held at Skokloster and has now been unfortunately removed to Tumba. There are the emblematized portraits. The first ones that I have been able to identify were done by Lorck in Constantinople. He was there from 1555 to 1558. They were under house arrest, and the images were done while under house arrest at the German house there. And then the last one is cosmopolitanism, and interpersonal memory in the Album Amicorum, and that's where we land today. So, customizing an emblem book as an Album Amicorum. The printed emblem book containing manuscript entries presents a special kind of customized book, a hybrid form which is the focus of one chapter of my research into social practices of the emblem. Both the Album Amicorum and the emblem book are genres from the first half of the 16th century, And very soon they became literally interleaved with one another when additional pages were inserted between the pages of a printed emblem book. So you can imagine that going on. And it repurposed the printed book as an album, a Stammbuch or Stammbuch. These interleaved pages then served as a place for signatories to make their entries. The greater share of the possessors and signers of Alba were men, although some women owned and signed Stammbücher, of course. Typically, the album owner presented his book to those he met on a study tour, and the person presented with the album entered words of friendship to document the encounter. So some coats of arms or other images were included in the entry, thus paving the way for the development of the emblem book as album. Within the social hierarchy of the Stammbuch, the highest ranking persons made their entries at the front of the book, while fellow students and family members closer to the end. Persons asked to sign the emblematic Stammbuch could therefore choose to make their entry near a specific emblem, although it had to be within their social range, so to speak. It had to be in their bandbreadth. As was particularly the case with the albums belonging to young men on their study tours, such as this one belonging to Christian Weigel from Silesia, the emblem chosen often reflected the signatory's relationship to the owner and provided some ethical advice to accompany the young man on his travels. Often signatories into an emblematic album exploited the print emblem to develop a new aggregate emblem construct in which the manuscript entry entered into a kind of dialogue with the printed image. These new and often very sophisticated assemblages consisted of printed and manuscript images and poetry derived from classical and biblical sources or of the owner's own invention. The entries were personalized, usually naming the book's owner, the signatory, and if you're lucky, the date and place of signing. The texts were usually multilingual, including, as in Weigel's volume here, Latin and German alongside a variety of other, usually European vernaculars. In cases where the album entry engaged in a dialogue with the printed emblem, the scripted text generally employed strategies of emblem creation, that is, adaptation, variation, amplification, and refinement of ideas from those in the printed emblem. The handwritten entry often intersected with and refocused or expanded ethical tenets from the printed emblem, combining them with fluent personalized messages from the specific writer to the owner of the Stammbuch. The manuscript album entry thus opened the printed emblem to new meanings and interpretation. The emblem book as album was therefore a uniquely customized book that interpolated handwriting into print. So this focus is on an early 17th century album built on top of a 16th century printed emblem book. This emblem book is a copy of Achilles Boecki, his Symbolicarum from 1574. The first edition was 1555. So Weigel's album is actually relatively unremarkable among early Stammbücher, and that little is known about the owner, and there are very few entries. But the entries that are there knock your socks off. It is highly significant for research and the analysis of customized books that newly imagine printed text and images in the social practices of the emblem. At least two signatories of Weigel's album recognize the opportunity of engaging with the printed work through their own handwritten entries. One was made by the young German poet Martin Opitz, and the other was made by a Silesian, Valentin Ludovicus, whose entry is the center of interpretation presented here. So the initials on the cover of the Stammbuch at the top, kind of worn, a little hard to see, CWCS, indicate the owner's name and origins, Christian Weigel Carnoviensis Silesius. That is, he's from Jägerndorf in Silesia. As I said, little is known about him. Given the context of his album, he was likely born a little bit before 1600 and was a pupil at the Gymnasium in Liegnitz. This particular Christian Weigel left few traces behind beyond his Stammbuch, which is now preserved at the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel. In addition, I'd like to say Uppsala has a spectacular collection of Stammbücher. The man who cataloged them all for Alvin is sitting here, and I want to thank Daniel and also Peter Sjöquist and Maria Berggren for being very helpful to me in my research here in Uppsala. So in addition to the initials, the volume cover at the bottom bears the date of 1613. In general, when the dates are included on the cover of an album amicorum, kind of as a super libros, as here, the date reflects its creation as a customized book, not the date of publication. So this practice confirms the owner's awareness of creating a book for a very special purpose. Therefore, this date, 1613, is when the nearly 40-year-old book came into Weigel's possession. It was interleaved with blank pages for use as an album, and it received a special binding to accompany him on his student journeys. So the practice of interleaving a printed book with blank pages was done for a variety of purposes, such as providing an author of a book with his own working copy, where he had space for making additions, emendations, marginalia, that sort of thing. It also offered intensive readers a place for taking notes and making comments. But in the case of an interleaved emblem book, the interfoliation was almost always done with the aim of repurposing it as an album amicorum. So the fine binding of Weigel's book with the decorated cover and its embellishments, together with the gilt foredges, confirms that the valuable place this splendid book had in the young man's library. What makes Weigel's album interesting is that he customized the book. The layout of the customized book is, we move on here. This is the manuscript book entry into the Wolfenbüttel copy. The layout of the customized book is consistent throughout. Here is a non-customized volume. So each of Bocchi's emblems begins as a single opening, that is a motto and pictura on the left, the subscriptio on the right. In some cases, the subscriptiones continue beyond a single opening. However, the basic unit is the opening left and right. By making Bocchi's volume into a Stammbuch, Weigel quite literally opened the emblems for customization by interpolating blank pages between the two halves of the emblem. The emblem's own intermediality in its employment of visual and textual sources already suggests the genre's openness to combination, recombination with other forms. When customized in this fashion as a Stammbuch, the inserted blank page invited signatories to sign within a specific emblem and enter into dialogue with it. In this manner, the two genres of emblem book and Stammbuch converged to create this hybrid volume. That a signatory often put a great deal of thought and consideration into his choice of emblem is attested by the entry Valentin Ludovicus the Younger, a poet laureate and a notary and a teacher at the Ducal School, put into his entry. He signed the album on 21 October 1615 at Symbolum 108, emblem 108. Because the Wolfenbüttel copy cannot be digitized, for comparison then, I use the copy from the University of Illinois. And that's why I have a white space down the middle of it, so you can see where the blank page would have been inserted. And it's not customized on an album, and it's freely available through Emblematica Online. So all manuscript images discussed in this paper were taken from the Wolfenbüttel copy, and I have to thank them for allowing me to make a photograph and to use them. Weigel's album demonstrates how a signer could create an entirely new textual environment for his chosen emblem. He signed the album at his hometown of Liegnitz and carefully composed the words. The long entry in a fair hand is opposite Bocchi's emblem 108, acumine ratione diligentia, etc., through keenness, reason, and diligence. Anyone can be happy, become happy. The image depicts a goddess, a conflation of justice and prudence, holding in her right hand scales, one pan with a round object and one with a square object. She sits astride a dolphin and wears a golden chain with the pendant of a heart with eyes on it. The background depicts a safe harbor with a lighthouse and little boats at anchor below. The rays emitted from the heavens and the lamp extending from the lighthouse reflect the glory of Olympus and eternal life. The pictura has been, as you see here, professionally hand-colored. The blue of the skies and the water, offset by the red banderole with the printed motto, Conosce, elige, matura, investigate, choose, advance. The rose colors highlighting Prudence's body closely associate her with the motto on that red banderole. The emblem pictura is framed in black, the inner frame is highlighted in gold, the Virtue's hair and her necklace are also golden, and the exquisitely executed coloring confirms that this signatory carefully chose his emblem as his own and customized its message for the album owner. It also signifies the particular importance that Ludovicus attached to emblem 108 and attests to his desire to distinguish his entry from all of the other ones. Instead of giving the album to an artist to add as heraldic device, this signer gave it to an artist to color this single image. The colors make the emblem stand out among all the emblems in the volume, compelling readers to ruminate over it. The motto is a device a young man could well apply in life. Know, choose, hasten to accomplish it. The words of the motto seem to be assigned respectively to the virtue, prudence, conosce, investigate or know, to the scale, elige, choose, and 3, the dolphin, matura, advance or hurry. Investigate, and I'm going to now just read aloud with you the poem that's in Latin and in English in my translation. Investigate, choose, advance. Heroic Berguntius thinks that these 3 things can bring anyone happiness one day. And the wise man explains it through these 7-fold signs. Than which divine number nothing is more sacred. For the heart endowed with eyes is circumspect prudence, the beginning of life, the source and origin of the soul. The ornament on the neck and the high breast, a golden necklace, is encyclopedic learning, the honor of the heart. The Virgin holding the scale weighs out the square and the round, hastening slowly, and is carried on a dolphin. Her honored brow is encircled by laurel fillets. She is a friend to the good and an enemy to the wicked. And that port, standing out most secure in the midst of waves, is the happy peace of the elevated soul. Finally, the shining brightness of radiant heaven signifies the hope and glory of undying life. So the printed poem guides our interpretation of a complex image. The attributes of prudence are circumspection and learning, as depicted in the golden chain with a pendant with little eyes looking out from the heart. Circumspection, of course, inherently bears the meaning of looking around and reinforces the concept of knowing keenness, as does the figure of the dolphin, whose attributes are swift intelligence and loyalty. The necklace and the golden chain reference the connectedness of things and knowledge. The turbulent sea represents the events of life. And the lantern at the harbor not only beckons to safety, it also stands for enlightenment, learning, and reflection. And we find these words occurring in various forms in the Mati. The tension between learning and reflection and choosing, and advancing in a timely fashion to complete a decision is embodied in the central figure of prudentia. Whoops. Let's see if I can keep my head on and do this. Okay. She's depicted, she glances back at the scales with the sphere of possibility and the cube of knowledge, while the dolphin advances to the harbor of enlightenment. In a sense, the present moment is delicately balanced, like the scales, pictured here, between the past and that which is to come. Prudentia is depicted not with her usual mirror and a snake, but with a pair of scales, which conflates her with justitia. Prudence is the ability to make right decisions, and the scales indicate an expansion into jurisprudence with the implication of correct legal decisions. The text is, in a sense, a juridical extrapolation of the well-known emblem Festina Lente, often portrayed by the anchor and dolphin as qualities of balancing haste and slowness. The adage Festina Lente was well known to contemporaries and would have resonated with readers of both the emblem and the album. So Bocchi addressed this particular emblem to Bergoncius, a legal scholar in Bologna. And Anne Rollet, in her magisterial study of Bocchi, states that the image was Bergonzi's personal device and interprets the elements starting with the three imperatives from the banderole as part of juridical decision-making, the three actions of intelligent reasoning, reflection and choice, and the expedient implementation of the decision. So, after having highlighted the emblem pictura by adding vibrant color, Ludovicos customized the emblem by supplanting the author's subscriptio with one of his own. His entry is on the interleaf page, and it makes a direct intervention into the compound reading of Bocchi's motto pictura and epigram. He inserts his own words. So I will read with you Ludovicus's version. This you might see a bit better. Yeah. So, investigate, choose, advance. So it is. Whomsoever it pleases to come to happiness in this sea of fluctuating affairs, let him subject himself to that one philanthropist, the truest of all, and less to an illusion, but with an open heart. Let him cling solely to him as is right. Whatever fate may by chance befall you, investigate with keenness, choose with reason, advance with purpose. In this way, how much safer is the port in which you are navigating, and thus you will be able to come to happiness. He who goes gently goes in health. Chi va piano va sano. This memento, written one of his own, was set down by Valentin Ludwig of Liegnitz, imperial public notary, instructor in the School of Arts in his homeland, at Liegnitz, October 31, Anno Domini 1615. Give you that. So the mix of languages, here Italian with Latin, is typical of both emblem and album entries. We can assume that the Italian rhyme is Ludovicus's own motto. He deliberately amplifies the motto from the banner in the emblem pictura, whose imperative scans are poetically balanced in a triad of three words of 3 syllables each. Conosce, elige, matura, and he intertwines the words from the banderole with the motto acumine and razione, and then he himself adds studio to his advice to the young man on a study tour, with the resulting motto of his own, conosce acumine, elige, razione, matura, studio. So in this manner, he admonishes Weigel to recognize the wise, choose reason and understanding, and to hasten to his studies. Moreover, there are several verbs of motion, to go, to hurry, to advance, which underscore the idea of travel and the journeys which the young Weigel undertakes for his study. So the fugue-like textual variation on the motto across the manuscript entries demand multiple nonlinear reading strategies. By creatively reworking the motto and the paratext of the printed emblem, Ludovicus shapes his manuscript entry to the printed emblem while simultaneously customizing his messages to Weigel. More of it. Okay, so you see, yeah, there we go. The Ludovicus entry. On the left is the printed emblem that has now been hand-colored. You see the manuscript entry again, and you see Ludovicus's manuscript. That is the recto of the inserted page. The verso is another one. On the verso of Ludovicus's entry is a hand-colored coat of arms entry by one Romanus Ludwig, also from Liegnitz, who served on the town council there. The motto and the date 1615 appear on a banner above a cipher, ABCDEF, which is a cipher for Allein bei Christo die ewige Freude, reflecting the polyglot practices of emblems and albums. It was completely typical for the time for individuals to abbreviate their personal mottos to save space. The date is given more specifically in the scroll at the bottom of the page as the 6th of November. These texts and the heraldic image constitute part of the identity formation and the creation of memoria that occur in Stammbücher. So on either side of the heraldic device is a 4-line rhyme in German. In my translation, there is nothing new under the sun. Fine words and lack of loyalty, be silent, observe, endure. All things have their own time. And the signature is Roman Ludwig of Liegnitz, illustrious citizen of the Republic of Liegnitz, from the quaestorship of the Senate, makes and writes these things as a souvenir of friendship for the finely learned and polite young man Christian Weigel of Jägerndorf in Silesia, 6 November, Anno Domini 1615, at Liegnitz in his own hand. So we have Ludwig's entry, and analogies can be drawn among the admonitions in the German poem to be silent, schweig, observe, merk, and endure, light. Bocchi's Latin, the Conosce Elegea Matura, and Ludovicus' amplification of the motto with 2 words each. It is striking, however, that Ludwig employs a very different strategy by using his entry, motto, heraldic device, and words of friendship on a single page. But nevertheless, the spatial orientation of his image on the back of the entry by Valentin Ludovicus associates him with that text and simultaneously keeps his own contribution within the pages of Bocchi's emblem. So through word associations across the motti, Ludwig engages indirectly with Bocchi's emblem and Ludovicus's reworking of it into this multipartite emblem. According to the logic of the Album Amicorum, whereby members of the same family or close friends often sign in clusters, it is telling that Roman Ludwig positioned his own vibrantly colored device on the back of Valentin Ludovicus's elegant entry. They're connected by dates, by geography, and so forth, and we can assume that they are members of the same family. So in conclusion, since Elizabeth Eisenstein's pioneering work, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, print has been associated with modernism, innovation, forward-looking developments. Yet the addition of manuscripts into the printed emblem fundamentally changes how the emblem is read and understood. The supplementation of the printed emblem with the technology of handwriting signals asynchronous, collaborative knowledge-making. The case study of Ludovicus's entry into Weigel's Stammbuch confirms a deep engagement with the emblem. Assembling the emblem book as an album created a new form of learned sociability that documents a complex web of learning, friendship, family, and networks through the polyvalent emblematic elements that are in dialogue with each other. The doubling of the genres emblem and album is a dynamic form of emblematic intervention, whereby the manuscript editions unleash entirely new interpretive potential. The case study of Ludovicus's entry into Weigel's Album Amicorum, analyzed here, shows how the signatory created a dialogue between the printed emblem and his own manuscript. These emblem-album constructs exemplify the workings of this hybrid customized genre and document social networks of learning. The opportunities for interpersonal communication expanded exponentially when the two genres of emblem book and album coincided. The scholarly conversation around the single emblem, ignited 60 years after the first publication of Bocchi's emblem, maintained humanistic discourses not only across time, but also across wide geographical distances and national cultures. Thank you.